Hi everyone! In this video, I'm going to be going over how to find the radius and diameter from when you're given the area of a circle. And this will be for remote learning during the week of April 13th. I'm going to go over how to find the radius first when you're given an area. So remember, the radius is the distance from the center of the circle to an edge. The area is talking about this space inside the circle. And the formula for finding area is area equals pi times the radius squared. So the steps are going to be similar to the ones when we were finding radius from circumference, but just a little bit different. So to find the radius, when you're given the area, you're going to plug in the known information into your formula and solve for the radius using inverse operations. So for an example, we have find the radius of a circle with an area of 64 pi. So my step one is going to be plug in the known information. So in this case, the known information is the area. So I'm going to plug in 64 pi into my formula here. So instead of area equals pi r squared, I'm going to have 64 pi equals pi r squared. For my second step, I'm going to use inverse operations to solve for radius. So I have 64 pi equals pi times the radius squared. The first thing I want to do is I need to get the radius by itself. So I need to get rid of this times pi. And so the opposite of multiplication is division. So I'm going to divide both sides by pi. So that allows me to cancel out that on this side, and I'm left with the radius squared here. When I do 64 pi divided by pi, these cancel out, and so I'm left with 64. Now this is the part that's going to be a little bit different. So you did practice earlier on this week with squares and square roots. So I have radius squared equals 64. The opposite or inverse of squaring a number is to take the square root. So what I'm going to do to both sides is I'm going to take the square root of each side. So that allows this square and square root to cancel out. So I'm just left with r, or radius. And the square root of 64 is 8, because 8 times 8 is 64. So I'm left with 8 equals r, or the radius. I'm going to go over another example, but this one they're going to have us use 3.14 instead of pi. So here I have find the radius of a circle with an area of 50.24 and use 3.14 for pi. So the steps are going to be the same. I'm going to plug in my known information. So in this case, I know the area is 50.24. So I'm going to plug that in. And I know that they want me to use 3.14 for pi. So I'm going to plug that in there. So now I have 50.24 equals 3.14 times the radius squared. So again, my second step is going to be to use inverse operations. So to get the radius by itself, the first thing I need to do is get rid of this times 3.14. And to do that, I'm going to do the opposite. So the opposite of multiplication is division. So I'm going to divide both sides by 3.14. That allows me to get rid of this and cancel this out on this side. So I'm left with the radius squared. And if I do 50.24 divided by 3.14 on the calculator, it gives me 16. So now I have 16 equals the radius squared. Well, I don't want to know what the radius squared is. I want to know what the radius is. So the opposite of squaring a number is to take the square root. So I'm going to take the square root on both sides. So the square root and squared are canceled out. So I'm left with radius, and the square root of 16 is 4, because 4 times 4 is 16. So I'm left with my final answer of 4 is the radius. Now, let's go over how to find the diameter when you're given the area. So for this one, we're going to use the same formula. We could use a different version of the formula for area with diameter, but it would be a little bit kind of messier. So we're going to use the same formula, area equals pi times radius squared. We're just going to have an extra step in order to be able to find the diameter. And remember that the diameter is the distance from one edge of a circle to the other edge that passes through the center, and that the diameter is 2 times or twice the radius. So, to find the diameter when you're given the area, plug in the known information into our formula, area equals pi r squared, and we're going to solve for the radius using inverse operations. Then, because the diameter is twice the radius, whatever I get as my answer for the radius, I just need to multiply that answer by 2. So for an example, I have find the diameter of a circle with an area of 9 pi. So again, first step, plug in the information they give me. So in this case, I know that the area is 9 pi. So I'm going to plug in 9 pi for the area. So now instead of area equals pi times r squared, I have 9 pi equals pi r squared. Then I'm going to use inverse operations. So I have 9 pi equals pi times the radius squared. So I want the radius by itself. So the first thing I need to do is to get rid of this multiplication and this timesing by pi. So the opposite of multiplication is division. So I'm going to divide both sides by pi. That allows me to cancel this out. So I'm left with radius squared on this side, and 9 pi divided by pi. These can cancel out, and I have 9 left on this side. Now again, I don't want to know what the radius squared is. I want to know what the radius itself is. So the opposite of squaring a number is to take the square root. So if I take the square root of each side, that cancels out and I'm left with radius. And the square root of 9 is 3. Now, a lot of people may stop here, but we have to remember our original problem asked us to find the diameter. So that's why we still have that one last step to do. So now that I know the radius, all I need to do is multiply that by 2, because the diameter is 2 times the radius. So if I plug in the radius, which is 3, here I have the diameter equals 2 times 3, or the diameter equals 6. So again, it's a similar process. We just have an extra step that we need to do, because our formula, we're solving for radius, but in these kinds of problems, they really want the diameter, so we just have to do that final step of multiplying our answer by 2, because the diameter is 2 times the radius. I'm going to do another problem, but for this case, I'm going to be using 3.14 for pi. So it says, find the diameter of a circle with an area of 78.5 and to use 3.14 for pi. So I'm going to plug in my known information into my formula. So I'm going to put 78.5 in for the area, and I'm going to use 3.14 for pi. So instead of area equals pi r squared, I'm going to have 78.5 equals 3.14 times the radius squared. I want to get the radius by itself, so I need to get rid of this multiplying by 3.14 first. So the opposite of multiplication is division, so I'm going to divide both sides by 3.14. That cancels out here, so I'm left with the radius squared, and 78.5 divided by 3.14 is 25. So I don't want to know what the radius squared is. I need to get the radius by itself still, so the opposite of squaring a number is taking the square root. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. That cancels out. I'm left with the radius, and the square root of 25 is 5. Now again, we need to look back. Our original problem asked for the diameter, so I have one last step I can't forget about, where I need to take the radius, which in this case is 5, and multiply it by 2, because the diameter is twice the radius. So 5 times 2 is the diameter, and 5 times 2 is 10. So my final answer is the diameter of this circle is 10. So again, just to review, we're going to be using the formula area equals pi r squared, and we're going to be using inverse operations.